Hello and welcome to Blapped and Podded Highlights. So what's this all about? Well, I have a Twitch show on Friday night at 2000 UTC called Blapped and Podded. And I thought it would be a good idea to take a highlight of that particular show. In this instance, I got the opportunity to interview Garst Tyrell, the Alliance leader of Triumvirate, about everything that was happening in Cloud Ring. So here is the interview. There we go. And then I get to do this one as well. Hi, Garst. Welcome.
Hey, Frost. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Wonderful to have you on. Hopefully the audience will let us know if they can hear you fine. Someone's just commenting on my keyboard because I have a very clackety-clack keyboard. It's like proper old school and makes loads and loads of noise. So thank you very much for coming onto the show. Obviously, we're kind of all aware from the people that watch my show, the fact that a lot is going on in Cloud Ring at the moment. We actually have quite a few people from Tri. Okay, I need to give you a little bit more volume. Let me just do that on my end quickly. So we actually have quite a few people from Tri in the room because apparently they're kind of active at the moment. So they're busy watching you and we're listening to you whilst they're busy in Cloud Ring. So obviously, let me bring up the Cloud Ring map. And then we can ask some questions. So clearly what we're seeing in the south was that initially Initiative just came in and they took BTAC-D, which was on the gate to Fountain. And then they started kind of heading inwards and they took a system right next to your staging system in F7C-HO. So then all of a sudden, literally I think it was probably about the last week or so, things started to escalate. So do you want to kind of describe how things have been interpreted from your point of view?
Sure, yeah, I can give you a really quick summary of the background on this too. So, Cloud Ring's a really interesting region for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it's a really good kind of transitional space between multiple other regions. So for PvP content, things like that, it's actually a really fun place to live. There's plenty of low sec nearby, wormholes, things like that. But from a strategic perspective, it's also essentially between GTC held space in the north and now Cloud Ring for the past year or so since we invaded and took it over last summer. It's basically been kind of a neutral buffer zone between the various blocks for things like that. Previously tribute areas like that in the north were also kind of filling a similar role until Winterco invaded and took that over earlier in the year. So that basically leaves Cloud Ring and Fade, Declan, Pure Blind in the north as essentially unaligned or non-affiliated space to the major coalitions and things like that. And that's something that was not contested during the Delve War for the past year or so. While that was going on, it was not a theater. It was not really interesting. So everybody was deployed down in Delve. That was the focus. And now that the alliances are back home, obviously, back to business as usual. They're starting to look towards expansion and things like that. So that said, one of the interesting things about Cloud Ring as well is from a PvP perspective as an FC, the jump ranges are actually very restrictive in a couple of ways. And so if you look in the south, the regional gate here, BTAC-D from J5A and Fountain is very decisive. So in its first move there was, of course, to establish a foothold in BTAC-D. And that's essentially their main transit route to go back and forth between Fountain and Cloud Ring for their fleets. Yeah. So when you look at power projection from there, the reason F7C is attractive is the same reason that we were living in that constellation, is that is a low sec route. So when you stick a jump bridge there from F7C to BTAC-D, as and it wants to do.
Yeah, and then you can get into Placid.
Yeah, so you're essentially building a low sec highway right over there as well.
Okay.
So one of the things that we're seeing right now as well, and what the guys in the chat are talking about in your stream right now, is Imperium has a fleet up to take the 6RCQ iHub, which they did successfully, deployed Fortizar up there. So when we start looking at moves like that, as an FC, it's an alliance leader, it's pretty clear that the aspirations there are once again to project power and jump bridges, things like that, into Fade, into Pure Blind in the north. So I think that gives a pretty good indication of where their heads are at from the Imperium side of things.
Okay, so do you consider that it would be possible for both of you to use Cloud Ring? And do you think that potentially the Imperium will just take these systems that will give them the jump routes they need and then leave it at that? Or do you think that potentially things are going to move beyond that? I mean, I see a comment from Jaden Jast that said Cloud Ring was in its territory before the Delve War. So do you think the aspirations are more for owning more territory?
Yes and no. I mean, you can go back however many years you want. The game's 20 years old. I'm sure there's people who owned Cloud Ring well before in it, so let's not get roast into memories here or anything like that. But we did attempt cohabitation for a while after Init moved home into Fountain, kind of consolidated there for a couple of months. We stayed out of Fountain, no real aggression there, back and forth. And after they did initially make their push and take BTAC-D and F7C for those jump bridge iHubs, we specifically did not aggress those things to see if cohabitation or something like that was possible. Unfortunately, well, I wouldn't even say unfortunately, because we love PvP, whatever shape it comes in, So for us, the conflict is the end game we're looking for, right? So not unfortunately, but as the way things turned out, inevitably Init found their excuse for continuing their gains into the region. I don't blame them. I don't take it personal. It's business, and I've been on both ends, both the attacker and defender, many times. So, in their place, I'm not saying I wouldn't have done the same thing. But that said, basically the biggest change in the last week was Init successfully destroyed, with Goon's help, our staging Fortizar and Otax Z. You had a couple of battle reports you want to talk about there.
Yeah.
And so we've left our previous home constellation for the past year, kind of in that bottom right area where you just circled and pink Otax Z, and we're actually staging nearby an NPC station, which of course is unevictable because of mechanics and all that sort of stuff. So what I think we're going to see right now is really going to be which side is more invested in the long run and really exploiting the space and having ownership of the area in practice. Because having names on TCUs, having iHubs is fine and all, but there's a lot to be said for that gray area in between. This isn't World War II. It's not like as the front line advances, you can't do anything beyond that. For example, we have R64s all over. We have SAW systems all over. We have Citadels all over. People can go back and forth. There's NPC SOV and Syndicate. There's NPC SOV and Outer Ring all over the place. So it's a very tricky region to control if you're not going to live in it. And I think that one of the more interesting things to watch going forward, just from speaking as like a not as the alliance leader of Tri, but if I was a neutral observer watching this conflict, would be how successful the proxies being placed here as buffer for Init, Ranger Regiment, FXR in particular, how successful they are in actually occupying the space. Because from Tri's perspective, putting back my CEO hat on again, we have no intention whatsoever of giving up. So they've started a long war, and I hope they're willing to commit towards finishing it, because we're not going anywhere.
Okay, good. Well, that gives us kind of a standoff situation, so we know where at least where Triumvirate stand on that side of things. I'm just going to say very quickly to my some followers as well. Dorf Nunigan, thank you for the follow. Oto Soak, thank you for the follow. And Nova Terran, thank you very much for the sub. That is awesome. Right, back on track with Cloud Ring. So one of the things that you obviously mentioned was the greater trash community. Now, we've seen, like, we formed Volta and Toilet Paper, who are kind of the two of the more active kind of PvP alliances within Greater Trash Community, come to your assistance on certain fleets, especially with their nightmares, which they seem to love. But what exactly is your relationship with Greater Trash Community? Because one minute it seems like you're part of that coalition, and then other times it's kind of more of a loose alliance. So where does it actually stand?
I mean, we're pretty close allies with them. We have a mutual defense pact and all that. So, I mean, the reason we initially established our relationship with them was that after we invaded last summer, started taking over Cloud Ring, they kind of independently of that moved in and were doing their own thing, trying to take their own space in Pure Blind and Declan and Fade. They had a good term is catastrophic success, in that the term that they actually flipped over all the renters, they took over multiple regions. They were very successful in building that coalition there. So as neighbors, and with a lot of former Tri members and leadership within Volta now, it was a natural relationship to strike up, to blow each other and assist each other with PvP. As small alliances and as small independent alliances not aligned with any of the major blocks, being able to team up and work together on timers allows us both to take fights and do things that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise in bigger engagements by ourselves.
Okay, so obviously one of the things is that the Imperium is very large. I mean, we saw from kind of the Pappy Imperium conflict that pretty much the whole of New Eden together can't push them out of a constellation. So, they have got numbers and they have got firepower. Now, even pulling in Greater Trash Community, that still leaves you extremely outnumbered. So I'm going to bring up a battle report, which is the one it's the one on OTAC Z, which was the armor timer, where I saw that Snuffed Out were there, and Snuffed Out were in carriers, which isn't kind of their usual kind of doctrine. We know they always like to drop in do dread bombs and stuff. So, and from what I understand, they actually had docking rights into the Fortizar and were able to tether and Skynet. So, what is the relationship with Snuffed Out? And yeah, that's just the question, really. What is the relationship?
Yeah, no, that's a very fair question. I mean, we fought Snuffed Out plenty of times, so that's definitely a valid question to ask. I think that's very simply a enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. That was a temp blue for one timer, so they did have docking rights. We allowed them to tether and dock on our Citadel, so we could make a carrier fleet together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason for that is really just like us, they're a group that likes to take on challenging fights, likes to take on aggressive fights and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're
So
heavily outnumbered. I mean, it was 741 to 200. Obviously, you had the benefits of carriers and skynetting, but still, that's beyond 3-1. So that's not your kind of everyday nullsec fight.
No, not at all. But it was also managed risk. We knew that, especially Snuff knew, they could dock and tether up and sign out anytime they wanted, right? So it was actually a manageable risk, but still obviously highly outnumbered and high risk in those terms.
Yeah, hence why you always fight on a PDS structure in armor timer, right?
Yeah, sure, whenever possible. Fortizars are very strong, so there's a lot of tactics that can come into play, but the short version is had init dropped onto that structure, there would be guaranteed cap losses from their side and would not be a surefire thing.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that wasn't necessary because the subcap advantage was just so overwhelming.
Yeah, but at the moment, I mean, you're only seeing subcaps coming from the Imperium, right?
So far, for the most part, that's what they've committed, yes.
Okay, and then on the second one of those, the second timer, which was the final timer, obviously then Snuffed Out didn't show for that, and it looks like you didn't contest it because it was like 526 Imperium to like 30 of Triumvirate, and nobody else was kind of called in. So is that the point when you decided, yeah, that there's no point in trying to hold this staging anymore, and we'll redeploy to somewhere else?
So we had already deployed out of there fully understanding that that was going to be a high-risk defense, and even had it been saved, there was nothing to say, it couldn't have been shot again 3 days later the next day. And it's one of those things where, as a defender, you have to be perfect every time. All it takes is, your bat phone's not showing up one time and the structure dies. So it just wasn't tenable to stay in that system anymore.
Okay, so you've definitely you've gone the NPC station route. That's going to be your kind of main deployment area then from now on, so that you basically know that you can constantly harass that way.
Yeah, the goal now is to be able to continue to fight and counterattack without having to be put on the defensive like that.
Okay, so now jumping over to the OTAC I Fortizar, where I think the timer, it was the armor timer last night. I see that this time, as well as having like We Form Volta and Toilet Paper show up, you had Pandemic Horde and Northern Coalition as well. So Panfam. Now Panfam and Tri have never kind of really been friends, really, have they? Or is it just once again the same situation as Snuffed Out, and it's like kills to be had and a chance to shoot at the Imperium for Panfam?
So we did briefly join Panfam before the Delve War and left last summer just because our members wanted to do something different. So I don't think there's any particular bad blood there.
Okay,
like that.
I wasn't aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the greater scheme of things, because of past relationships with FCs and leaders in places like NC and PL, we probably have more quote-unquote ties to Panfam or something like that, but that's all peripheral. I mean, no one actively coordinates with Panfam, if we can avoid it kind of thing, because we prefer, just like Volta, stuff to kind of do our own thing whenever possible. So for this timer, as one of the biggest problems right now, I think, in EVE is basically when you get to Fortizar fights, and especially with jump fatigue being removed from Ansiplex's networks and things like that, it's extremely hard to stop a single grid fight from escalating, especially when you're involving these major blocks. They all have spies on each other, they all share intel, they all talk. So even if we hadn't said anything at all to Horde or NC or whatever, they still already knew about the timer through their own intel networks and things like that. And because of that, when you look at it from the Imperium perspective, of course, you have to assume that these people are going to show, even though we have no ties to them, and we were purposely trying not to invite them until it became absolutely necessary just from the sheer numbers. So it becomes kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? So at this point, I think Panfam's interested in assisting simply because we're fighting against the Imperium right now. At the end of the day, I don't think they really care too much whether Cloud Ring stays in neutral hands or not. But I do think that, even at the tactical level, their FCs are looking for something fun to do, and fighting goons is always something fun to do. So, I'm sure they'll offer their help in the future for bigger timers and things like that.
Yeah. So whilst you are dealing with strategic objectives, it's going to become a bit of a fight club, and potentially other groups will come in and just YOLO in on a fight, just to give their SC some practice and to keep the pilots happy and get some pew-pews going, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's something where, obviously, as rivals, Panfam wants the Imperium to be unsuccessful with this. They want us to, presumably, they haven't said this, but I would assume that they want us to be successful in, harassing the area and tying down Imperial forces and things like that. But at the same time, it's not like we're blue to them or anything like that.
Okay. Just while I remember as well, I'm just going to say to everyone that's watching, please, if you've got any questions for Garst, then in regards to this whole conflict and stuff, then please put it in chat. And then I can relay that through. Also the other thing as well that I've kind of seen is obviously, it's the meta is very much hacks, right? It's all about the Munins and the occasional Serb and Eagle fleets. But you have a big passion for nightmares. I mean, the nightmares seem to come out a lot. So, what is there a particular reason for that, or do you see yourself having to go over to Munins like everybody else?
So the hack meta is really, when you talk about the largest fights in EVE, you're talking about coalition versus coalition. The hacks scale much more effectively in those full fleet sizes than they do at smaller levels. If you're talking like a 50v50 or 100v100 fight, where we prefer to take our engagements, that's where you can really have a lot of high skill level from things like faction battleship usage, alts and things like that. Once you start getting into the biggest scales, hacks are a really popular meta right now, simply because they're cheap, they're fast, they're maneuverable. They have the assault damage control, which gives them a little bit more survivability in these blob of blob engagements. As far as the nightmares go, so that's a Volta specialty right now. They do a really fantastic job, fighting with their nightmares. So, big props to them for coming to help us out. It's been a lot of fun with them, and we've gone the armor faction battleship route, so materials, things like that in the past, and really just with the hack meta being as it is, there's very limited room for creativity. Just because the numbers are so big. Once you have 100, 200 Munins, it doesn't matter what ship you bring; it's still going to get alpha.
It's the alpha capability of the hacks that's the issue, isn't it? Once you get, like you say, 150 people in a fleet, and you've got 150 Munins shooting at you, it's like, even if some people have only got level 1 or 2 skills, it's still going to do blap it out of the universe immediately.
Yeah, I think just from general atmosphere, from talking to other FCs in the community and things like that, I think that's pretty stale meta. I don't think anybody really likes it, but it's one of those things where it's if you don't do it, you're going to lose out. So everyone kind of ends up just flying units and evils, sometimes serves. So that is something that it would be nice for CCP to look at iterating in the future. If that's really the meta they're looking to reinforce this game in the long term.
Okay, so I mean, I think now probably the best question I can ask is, where do you hope this conflict is going to go? What would be the ideal scenario for you that you think would offer the most for the game, not only just for your players but for Imperium players as well, in terms of just creating good content without it going into the mud, kind of so to speak. So how do you hope this is going to play out?
I mean, you raise a really good point. A lot of people forget that you're talking about PvP. this about the other side is fun too. Like, people should enjoy having wars, right? And when you start going into a no fun zone, must win at all costs kind of thing, you might have losing sight of the forest for the trees kind of thing. Where at the end of the day, but then again, I mean, so from Tri's perspective and my personal perspective, most of us have been playing over a decade. We want to have challenging fleet PvP as our end game. It's why we play. We're not trying to build a sandcastle or anything like that. But at the same time, that may be a completely alien mindset to what the coalitions are looking at. This might be just one more chess piece on your chess move on the greater chessboard of Panfam versus Imperium or something like that, right? So if we're approaching it from different mindsets entirely, you end up where the Imperium will form up 700 dudes, which is almost twice as many people as we have in our entire alliance, right? Knowing full well that we're not going to be able to contest that on our own, and then forcing us to essentially bat phone Panfam or something like that just to even have a chance of eating the numbers. And then it becomes a self-licking ice cream cone where you say, see, I knew Tri was Panfam all along. They had Pandemic Horde show up to defend their fort. Well, yeah, it kind of is what it is at that point when you bring 700 people.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, at the end of the day, it's war and you want to have fun, but you need to be able to not be a carpet, or to be a rug that people walk over, right? So you've got to be able to stand your ground, and you will use, whatever friends you can call upon, to make that happen.
And that's done in extremis, right? I mean, that's the vast minority of fights. Like our end state, you asked us what our ideal end state was. Really is being able to create our own content and have fun. So if that's something as small as shooting Athena or Astra or toasting soft a beta response fight or something like that, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to have control over the content that we have and the fights we take and the challenges we take on, and that's why we have remained independent and neutral ever since moving out here in particular. And the downside of that is being a small fish in a big pond. When a big fish comes knocking, that's the risk you run. And no one in Tri is upset that our staging fort died. It's kind of inevitable. No one has false illusions that when 800 people show up, you're somehow going to save it with 50. Like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, were you able to extract most stuff, and you didn't have an asset safety issue or anything? Yeah.
No, unless someone was AFK, everyone's stuff was moved out plenty of time.
Good. Okay, well, I think that covers everything from my point of view. Is there anything else that you want to add, or you think that needs to be said?
No, I think we've hit most of the high points. I think looking forward, what might be interesting from kind of a commentator's point of view or an onlooker's point of view would be to see if this conflict evolves into something, greater Panfam versus, and is this, like, for example, we're looking at right now a jumper's route likely being planned towards Fade, towards Pureblind, something like that. Is this, an early indication of Imperium dreaming of invading Declan, invading Pureblind, kind of squashing GTC and getting rid of the last kind of neutrals in the game? Are they trying to advance their border towards the north? And then once that starts happening, does it take time for, Winterco or Panfam to say, oh shit, well, we can't let Imperium take it, so we better invade Pureblind first? Yeah. So there could be some interesting, political developments this spring coming up here if things continue this way. But as far as what we can do is try, we're going to keep fighting. Yeah. We are going to keep trying to have as much fun as we can, but we also need to be realistic about what we have. No one in Tri thinks we're going to go invade Delve and destroy goons or something like that. That's never been the point, right?
If I can interrupt you just there, that actually ties in with the question from one of the watcher viewers. Have you made any plans in case things go for the worse and you lose control of the region? So that kind of ties in with what you were just talking about. So can you answer that in any way?
Yeah, and we're actually executing those plans right now. So as far as control goes, again, don't get spun up on TCU control, iHub control, or something like that. When it comes to actually practically using the space and who is actually physically, owning the moons, who is physically like ratting the systems, roaming the space, whatever, that's going to be a gray area for a long time. It may be an init iHub or init TCU in a system, but it may be Tri people sitting in there camping that jump bridge or, camping that gate, making it basically unusable in practice, right? So my criteria has always been we will keep fighting until it's no longer fun or we find something better to do. But we don't see that happening anytime soon. We're here for the long haul.
Okay, all right, perfect. Well, that's it from me. So if you want, we can wrap that up there. I think that was very enlightening. So thank you very much for coming on, Garst, and for answering my questions and for giving us a much better understanding of what's going on in that particular part of New Eden.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, all right. So you take care.
Thank you. Take care.